Hey guys, this is Bales. I'm at FantasyLabs, and I wanted to introduce a new tool and ownership dashboard concept that we created, which is one of my favorite things that we've ever launched. And I think that we're going to really build upon this, and there's so much that can come out of it. So this is really the tip of the iceberg, but going to be a really, really valuable tool for, I guess, three reasons. Well, the first is that it's just going to be interesting to look at ownership across stakes, which is what this is set up to do. We will have, once a contest launches, we will have ownership for those players within minutes uploaded onto the page. We have it for every sport. And as new games come in, we will update that ownership. So once a game starts, we'll know players' ownership, and it will be on this page. And so the first goal of the page is just to be able to see that ownership, have it all in one place where you can look at every single player, you can sort, you can look at it across stakes, and that's just a generally interesting thing to do. The second goal is it can help you identify sharp plays and assess the guys to whom you have a lot of exposure by looking at the difference across stakes. So I'm looking at last night in NBA on DraftKings. Russell Westbrook was in 37% of lineups in the $4 and 49% in the 333. You can see his ownership went up across stakes. So the higher the buy-in, the higher his ownership. Generally, we're going to have sharper players, obviously, in a 333 or a $5,300 buy-in than we are in a $4. And so if they're using Westbrook at a much higher rate than people in a $4, probably he's a generally sharp play. And so it's a really good way to separate out some of the volatility in night-to-night performance. We can't always look at points to determine if a player is a good play. There's just a lot of variance, even in a sport like basketball, which is the most predictable, perhaps. And so this volatility column has the difference between the low stakes and the high stakes, in this case the $4 and the 333. These contests will change, but generally we're bringing in the largest GPPs at the low stakes, mid stakes, high stakes, and ultra high stakes, which would generally be 1K or above. But we can use that volatility and the difference in ownership across stakes to assign a grade to players. So we can look at how ownership changes. Decker last night in 25% of lineups in the $4, and that skyrocketed to 47% in the 27, 53 in the 333, and 58%. So well over twice as many in the 5300 as in the $4. Probably Decker was a generally high value player, and we can use that ownership to tell that, give him a grade, and you can see that. And so going back and looking at past slates, which you can do here, you can go back and look at any date you'd like, can really be a useful way to analyze your plays. And so those are the aspects of this tool that are free. So if you're logged in as a free user or not logged in, or you're not a pro member at FantasyLabs, you'll see this, and you can see all of this data, which is really useful. Again, it'll be uploaded within minutes after a slate begins. So at 7:05 Eastern time, shortly after NBA slates begin, we should have the ownership for the players whose games have started, and we'll keep updating that as new games are coming in. And you can see all this stuff for free. Pro users will be able to also see their exposure if they've built lineups on FantasyLabs, and then leverage. So I'll go back to a prior date when you can see exposure. So this is my exposure on this night to certain players, and you can see this is the percentage of lineups that I had them in. So if we go back to 2-1 in models, we should see the same. You can see Seth Curry, 83% of lineups. These are just sample lineups I generated. And you can see the exposure right there. And so that's really useful. Right after games begin, you will have a GPP grade. We can actually use golf. Golf is going on right now, and I have some lineups that I generated there. So we have my exposure here, and you can look at the same within models. So here are my lineups that were generated for PGA. You can see Justin Rose, for example, in 54%. So you can sort and see that he's in 53.57%. And this is my exposure to each player. And then, so if I'm analyzing how sharp of plays these were, I might sort by exposure and then look at the GPP grade. So let's sort by this. You can see that maybe 10 guys are above 1.4 or 1.42, somewhere in this area. So these are probably overall the sharpest plays. So if we sort by exposure, these are the guys that I had the most of, and you can see most of them were what are considered sharp plays. We have one Mullinax, I'm not sure how to say that, maybe not the best play according to this metric. His ownership actually goes down across stakes, generally not a good thing. So this is really valuable to immediately assess your GPP plays. Again, I think it's really valuable to do it like this because there's not really variance too much in ownership percentages across stakes. If a guy is significantly higher in the $300 buy-in than he is in a $3, he's probably a good play regardless of what happens on the field or on the course. So it's just instant analysis, which I think is really, really valuable. So if you're building your lineups on FantasyLabs, the exposure will be right here. We'll have the ownership and GPP grades uploaded immediately after games begin, and it can be an instant analysis, instant reaction, and then look at the players who aren't in a lot of high stakes lineups, and you can start to consider why that might be the case, where maybe you went wrong, maybe you didn't go wrong, maybe you're really high on a guy who for whatever reason others aren't, but a really good way to judge your picks. And then the final thing that I think is awesome, and I guess the third use of this FantasyLabs dashboard is the My Leverage. So this looks at the exposure, your exposure, and then the ownership, and we use the mid stakes as a default. So it's comparing my exposure to the ownership of that player in this case the $33, and basically giving me a rank of how important that player is for me. So it's a way to instantly and better sweat contests if you're watching games. So typically you might think that your the most important players are the guys you have in the most lineups, but really it's the guys who you're highest on relative to the field, which I think is a really just important concept to grasp. If you have 40% of a player, but he is in 45% of lineups in a tournament, he's probably not really that high leverage to you. So an example of this for me might be Shane Lowry, 34.8% of my lineups, and if we go to the 36% in the $33, so almost exactly the same, and you can see the leverage is really low. We can sort by leverage here and see, so these are the highest leverage golfers in this particular slate for me. These are the guys that I have the most of relative to the field, and these are the guys that are the least important. You can see some guys that I have quite a bit of, even Mickelson, 31% of my lineups, 34%. So just generally not going to be as important to me as a player who I have in fewer lineups. So for example, Sink, who's in 15% of mine, but only 3%, 5x the ownership in the $33. And then these arrows just represent if you have more or less than the field in terms of exposure. So a green arrow means that you have more, your exposure is higher than the field's ownership, and a red arrow means that your exposure is lower. So yeah, I think that there's a lot of uses that can come out of this. Definitely use it to assess your play, use it to have better sweats. You can come on here right after, as long as you made your lineups on Fantasy Labs, come onto the page right after lineup start, which I've been doing since we've built this page, and see which players are the highest leverage for you, the guys that are most important, that really are going to be the key to your success in that slate. You can instantly analyze if they were sharp plays or not, and just see the ownership differences across stakes. And you can also, if you're looking at a past date, you can see the actual points that they scored, and you can this might be a good way to assess the volatility of a sport. How often are the sharp plays, the guys with the highest GPP grades, how often are they actually scoring a bunch of points? So a lot of things that we can do here. This is going to be a springboard for us to build a lot of other really cool tools, but take a look and good luck.